I think, certainly in my experience in the last 18 months, I've noticed that there are people who absolutely love and thrive on lockdown. And then there are people who really struggle, and there's everyone in between. And so, it depends if you're those outliers, if you're having a really great time, then it's this environment really suits you. So if you're a bit more socially inactive generally in your life, then this sort of environment really doesn't change that for you. But for many, many people, there are lots and lots of struggles. I think also having kids at home has added to that burden, because you have priorities to deal with them, and they're also having their own psychological issues with being away from friends, being away from quite the structure they were in, not doing their other extramural activities where they probably had a bit of an outlet and a bit of fun. And so you're not only seeing to your own needs and your own psychological and mental well-being, but you have to see to the needs of everybody else in the household. So I think one of the things I think is really important, since we have more time, is to utilize that time better. Because I actually think when we're not in lockdown, we often take each other for granted. I think we have this expectation that everyone's got their roles and everyone's doing their roles, and things work pretty smoothly because you've been doing that for X amount of years. I think what really happens is now we have expectations of our partners that we're not necessarily voicing, and we mind reading about how we want them to support us, and we're not actually sitting down and having rational conversations about that. And because we're all tired and overwhelmed and stressed, it doesn't come out particularly well, that asking for help. And I think we should really be using this as a great opportunity to connect emotionally with our partners and our children, to talk on more of an emotional level around how we are feeling, what our expectations are, what are our needs, how are we coping. It's a fabulous time to actually check into each other's psyche, which we don't normally do. We don't do enough of. And certainly I see that in my practice, where there's a lot of mind reading going on in people's relationships and marriages, but they're not checking in. And to me, this is a great time to start doing that. So it's also time to reevaluate. What are your goals? What are your jobs? What are your responsibilities in a household? What are your expectations of your partner? So as you asked, how do we make that time? So I've got lots of clients and that are going through this at the moment. And so we talk about how do you, as you said, get the kids to bed at a decent hour so that you can have maybe a bit of time to spend together. So if people have very, very young children, that can actually be more helpful because they can go to bed a lot earlier. And then what we try and get parents to do is to make a dinner together and actually have a date at home, where they spend, at 7:30, they sit down and they have dinner together and start talking about the things that they need to get off their chest. Also to be grateful, to show gratitude when somebody's stepped and they normally wouldn't have stepped up. I think this is a fabulous opportunity to be seen by your partner. And I think it's something we really need to do, is be recognizing what our partners are going through and being able to support them in whatever the positives and the negatives in what they're experiencing. And to me, it's about making those opportunities. If the kids are busy doing something on a Sunday, find an activity to do together that's just you and them. So, for example, one of the things my husband and I did this weekend was we made ravioli together. Now, you wouldn't catch me dead making ravioli at the best of times. It's patskadick, it's a big task. But when you put on music and you can, you've got a fast on and you can speak to one another and you can, kind of do what you need to do, but you're doing it together, you don't feel that resentful because the outcome is something really positive and you get an opportunity to kind of connect with one another. So it's making those opportunities, going for walks and, being able to express how you're feeling and how you're coping. But I think the big thing is to be seen for your pain or your anguish or your joy and your pleasure. So I don't know, I hope that goes a bit of the way too.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And can we just delve a little bit deeper into the romance versus the practicality of it all, because we have to all be so practical now. We have to ensure the kids are on their Zoom for those who have kids, and there's a lot of things to arrange.
Mhm.
But finding that spark, you said it's a lot about being seen and connecting emotionally with each other. Does that lead then to the romance and in the bedroom, so to speak, or what are
Well,
something?
absolutely. I think, it's about having those furtive glances and arranging to have sex tonight. So what are we going to do that makes us feel more intimate and more connected with one another? So if we're arranging that, tonight's the night, what can we do as a team to make that happen? So then we both, it's the same as cooking, sushi or whatever, making a meal. It's when you plan something and you have an event to look forward to, what do the two of us do as a team to work together to make that happen? Then you can also say, well, because we're in lockdown and there's nowhere to go and we don't have to get the kids up at 6 to get them to school on time, we've got an extra hour because we're not traveling and we're not schlepping and taking. What do we plan to do tonight? So could we try something new in the bedroom? Or is it just less stressed and therefore we have the time? So we'll switch off the TV earlier because we're all sick of being on our screens. And when the kids go down, we have dinner and then we do something nice for each other. So you might have a bath together or a shower together. You're taking time that you would never normally have the time to take because it's just rush, 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 rush. And it's going to a minion or it's going to a shiur or it's fetching this one from ballet and so you take advantage of the fact that we don't have those schedules to keep and we don't have to schlep and take. And then you could think of, are there new things we'd like to try? I mean, a lot of sex therapists will say is that we go to the same destination when we have sex with our partners, but it's about seeing it through different eyes. So when you're more relaxed and you feel more connected and you feel more seen and heard by your partner and invested and you've been thinking about this the whole day, the odds are that you're going to have a better sexual experience that night.
Hmm. And Caron, because obviously you're practicing throughout this whole period, right? You're not seeing people face to face.
No, I am a whole
You
time,
are.
18 months, whole time. So I do a combination. I do telephone, Zoom, and face to face.
Are you finding people are engaging more with each other during this time, especially those who are at home, working at home, maybe in different rooms, or,
Yeah.
or is there more conflict? And how are people navigating that? How are people winding down that conflict and coming back to that safe, intimate spot?
Yeah. So as I said, we have a bit of a combination of people and their experiences. Some of them are loving it. Some of them are hating it. So for some, I've got, especially fathers who are stuck at home with lots of little children or a couple of little children, and they're working in their bedroom and there's a noise outside and their bedroom has lost the sanctity that it used to have. So, when I teach young brides and grooms, we talk about the bedroom being a safe place. Your bedroom is supposed to be your sanctuary. So if children want to come in, they have to knock, they have to prepare you for their entrance. And it's something that they need to learn as well about their own bedroom. But it used to be a safe space. Now I've got people who wake up and literally have to walk 2 feet, and that's where they're going to work for the rest of the day. And they can see their bed there, and it's the whole thing is just, it's not a place they want to be 24/7. And so for those individuals, as much as possible, we try to get them to go back to work if they can, if work is a safe space. But otherwise, it's also getting them to actually go out and go for an hour's walk and then come back and settle down to work. And then, at lunchtime to maybe have lunch with the family and invest with that sort of a experience. And then once again, after lunch, go for a walk and come back. And so we want them to not see, there has to be a separation of church and state. And I've got to say that from a mental health perspective, we need to go to work, because what's happening now is our partners have become our entire village. And that's really not something we want to encourage, because it means that all my needs have to be met by that one person. And that's too hard for any one person to do. And so when we're at work, we're interacting with other people around us, we have that opportunity to say, I've got somebody who likes art, and I've got somebody who likes music, and I love, I've got somebody who likes food. And then I come to my partner and he doesn't like any of those things. We have X, Y, and Z in common. And so it's about, as I say, having an opportunity to invest in that person in a different way and find commonalities and the things that you enjoy doing together. but you also have to outsource the other stuff. So you have to connect with other people that connect with that other part of you. Otherwise you become resentful, and this poor person gets it in the neck, but they're not doing anything wrong. They just can't be your everything. And it's about just managing those expectations that we have of our partner to be that everything.
And Caron, do you think this is learning new skills for some people? Because our whole lives, many partners are used to going to work and then coming and seeing each other for a few hours every day. And now for the first time, for many couples, they're around each other so much. And, maybe it's like a new skill. Maybe that's why it's so difficult, because it takes discipline, it takes effort, it takes work to set that time aside, to spend time with each other, to make it a priority.
Absolutely. I think, one of the funny things that I'm noticing is for some of my couples, they're going from couplehood to friendship. And, it's something that we try to encourage when people are dating. But for many of my couples, they never did that. It's like there was this attraction, and then it went on the slippery slope, and then we're getting married. And it's, how do we find the things that we have in common? Because we then get stuck into just doing whatever our roles are. So our roles might be, we go to work, or we care for the kids, or we whatever, and we lose a sight of ourselves, but we certainly have never really met this other person. And so this is a great opportunity. So one of the strategies I do with my couples is each one of them gets an opportunity to ask the other one out on a date, even though the date might be in their own home. And then it's to introduce them to something about who they are. So it might be watching Hamilton on Apple TV and watching the stage production and saying, this is what I love doing. Did you know that? It might be introducing them to a certain food that you were brought up with as a child that brings back lovely memories. So you could do the recipe together, or you could just make that dinner or that meal for that person. So normally I would do that when people are going out on dates outside. I would say, take your partner to a place that you would like to show them, because it's a beautiful view, or it sings to your soul. So I want them to do the same sort of thing, but in their own homes. Also going for walks. You could say, let's go for a walk to Centennial Park. Let's do things that we would have done when we dated. But for many, especially in my frum couples, my more religious couples, the dating period was so short that they don't even know how to date one another. If I say to them, go on a date night, or make a date, or invite your partner out on a date, they don't even know what that looks like anymore, because they went on sex and that was the quota, and then they were engaged and married. So now I'm teaching them those skills of how to actually be present and talk about anything that's not the kids, and not tax, and not our budget, and not the practicalities of running a home, but actually, and that's what I mean by being seen, becoming part of the village, but not everything in that village.
Can I just digress? Same topic, but how important is it to have that element of friendship within your relationship? So, for instance, what if you, after maybe exploring each other more in lockdown, you find that actually your hobbies and your interests are so varied and so different. And it may make you think, well, what really is holding us together? We've never really focused on it before to this extent, but now that we're spending so much time together, there's less points of connection because we have so much time. So how important is that friendship, is, having similar interests to that relationship?
So it's certainly, you need to have some similarities, and generally just by the mere fact, for example, frum people already have so much in common because they have a whole belief system, they have a value system. But when we say doing things, so doing activities, that doesn't, you don't have to have everything in common when it comes to activities. What you want to know is how we feel about things. How do we express ourselves? How do we, if we're not enjoying an activity, let our partner know? Do we give things a go because it's important to our partner? So how much are we investing in the relationship? Or we just say no because we're aggravated? Or so when you're finding activities that you have in common, I think it's about trying lots and lots. It's very rare to find nothing in common. But what you really also want to find in common is how do we communicate in an effective way that we're not hurting somebody, and can we grow from the experience? So can I try something that I would normally have tried, and actually maybe I like it? So that's, partners can show you novelty, and you want to be curious. And I think that's really what I want to encourage is in my couples, is that be curious about what happened to that person today. What did your experience do to you today that maybe changed your outlook about something? And so when you're introducing somebody to an activity that's novel to them, I would love them to be curious, because if this is something you love, just by the mere fact that you love it is something I want to give a good damn go to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it is teaching you how to be compassionate. It is teaching you how to be present and mindful. It's also teaching you how to use language, how hurtful and dangerous and harmful language can be. Because if there's one thing I've learned about COVID, and especially what goes on in the news, is, the language is very emotive, but some of it is very, very scary and frightening. And, how can we be compassionate with our partners so that we don't make them fearful and anxious? We want to be a soft place to land, which encourages them to want to resolve conflicts with us.
Yes, yes. And can I just put a message out there to all those listening? If you would like, you can post a message in the chat, or even send a message to me personally, and I can ask your question. So that's just everyone here. Feel free to pose a question. For my next question, Caron, can we talk maybe some practical tips as to, what happens if, you're trying to get yourself organized, or you're trying to work, and suddenly the kids are, you told your husband or you told your spouse, your wife, to have the kids, you have an important meeting, and all of a sudden something happens and they're screaming, and you find your blood pressure start to rise and you feel angry. What are some tips to calm yourself down and perhaps to look at your spouse in a more forgiving way, when you feel that tension, especially now during lockdown? What are some practical things that we can do?
Okay, so I would start off by saying that just generally, one should be managing one's mental health as well as one can, because at the end of the day, if you don't look after you, you can't look after anyone else. So there is a bit of selfishness in that I need to do the things that I need to do that help me to be really mindful and present and calm and functional. So for example, you might say, well, I need, if I'm a kind of person who needs 8 hours sleep, what am I doing to make sure that I'm getting the 8 hours sleep? It's going for a walk, it's listening to podcasts, it's doing relaxation exercises. So one of the strategies I give to my clients is they have to do a breathing exercise 5 times a day. So they start off as they wake up, is to do this where you breathe in for 5 seconds, take a nice deep breath in, and you let it go for 5 seconds. And you do that 6 times. So that takes exactly 1 minute. So you do that before you get up and check your body and say, am I alive? How am I feeling? Are my knees sore? You don't even ask that question, you just breathe. And that just slows the heart rate down, and it slows that like anxiety push. Then when you get up, go for a walk, go do what you want to do, then have breakfast, and either before breakfast or after breakfast, take that moment to breathe again. And then I say do it before lunch and before dinner, or after lunch and after dinner, and then just before you go to sleep. So that just brings you back to the present, and it's a way of checking in with yourself and saying, how am I traveling? I, for one, am somebody who goes for walks. I've become a bit addicted to podcasts since COVID began. They're terrific, and you can find ones that really suit your personality or your interests. So I go for a walk as long as the podcast lasts. So that's usually around about 45 minutes. So then by the time I come back, I've had a bit of me time, and now I have an ability and a capacity to kind of invest in other people. So when the kids, and I have a child who's a bit difficult at the moment. So when you know that there are going to be times or moments in the day that they are struggling more, or they find it more difficult, it's to slow your breathing down and say, how am I going to find a positive way of engaging with this kid? So whether it's sitting down and doing homework with them or whatever, you have to flick that switch that says, let's do it differently. Because when I approach that child in a frustrated, aggressive, tired manner, I'm going to get that in return. They're going to reflect that back to me. So it's how do I do that in a really positive way? So if I'm not looking after myself, there's no way that I can do that effectively. So now you have your partner who's struggling. So what you want to be able to do is, if you're trying to do something, you'll have to excuse yourself from the meeting and say, I'll just be a moment, I'll be back. Because there's possibly not a person on the planet who doesn't get what you're going through. And everyone is supremely compassionate about what everyone's going through. And you can express, like, I just can't concentrate, there's too much noise, give me a moment to go and settle the kids. And then you go and you be compassionate to your partner and say, how do I support you in being able to do this? Because I understand that this is really difficult for you, rather than blasting them and saying, I did this for you yesterday. What's wrong with you? Why can't you do this for me? I ask you one thing, right? Rather go, I love this person. They're doing their best. They're lacking capacity at this moment. The kids are lacking capacity. If I come in there with that mood, that's going to blow the whole thing out of the water. So if you come in there in a loving way and in a light way, it's going to settle people down much quicker. And then it's to say afterwards, that night, you might say, I'm curious as to, what was going on for you at that moment, and what could we put in place to make things better for you, so that you feel that you're coping better, or that you can manage that situation better. So it's, in every discussion, I like people to be solution orientated. So come up with strategies, not just to say, it's your fault, you're stupid, you're this, you're incompetent, you're whatever. When I look after the kids, I'm capable. And that's just not true. You can get a kid on a good day, you can get an adult on a good day, you can get both on a really lousy day. And so you want to look at them in the same way what you're going through. So if I'm having a tough time, they must be having a tough time too. So don't add to the tumult. That makes sense.
Yes. And people often talk about the importance of breathing, and interesting how that's the first thing that you mentioned. And what is the effect of breathing? Does it lower the heart rate? Does it give you that does it bring you back into the present, give you a bit of stillness to just think, in a level way about the situation instead of just reacting?
Yeah. So the way the brain works, if your heart rate is up, it sends the message to the brain that there is a fire somewhere that needs to be put out, or there are snakes in the grass in your bedroom and you need to go and get rid of them. And so it just keeps dumping adrenaline, and your heart rate just continues to go up. And the more you do that, you're in fight, flight, freeze mode. And so you can see, when your partner's not coping, she's in one of those modes, what we call amphibian brain. It's like reactive brain. It's just kill or be killed. And so when you slow your heart rate down, basically you're telling your brain that I'm okay. I don't need this anxiety. Now, anxiety is a very helpful thing. It's not something we want to get rid of altogether, because it makes you alert and a bit hypervigilant when you need to be. The problem is with COVID and, as I say, the language that we use, people are becoming more hypervigilant than they necessarily need to be. So having that moment when you slow down your breathing gives you the perspective that actually there are no fires, there are no snakes in the grass, there is no danger here. We're all safe, we're all together, and the people that I love most are under this roof. And so it just kind of centers you. And so slowing your heart rate down is always a really, really good thing. So if you're going to do anything that's anxiety provoking, so give a talk, drive a car if that's something that stresses you out. If you slow your breathing down before you do that, you stop dumping those terrible, chaotic thoughts like, this is going to be terrible, I'm never going to find my way, my child is going to be having a tantrum now, before the child's even done anything. So that's what it stops. And you're stopping that cycle by slowing your breathing down.
Right. Just want to ask you a question. A good question's come here on, someone's asked me to ask on their behalf about domestic violence, and the fact that we've seen in the last lockdown that there was a significant increase in domestic violence and calls for help to those, domestic violence service providers. And so I guess the question is, what would you say to someone who finds themselves in an abusive situation, or if you have a friend who discloses to you that they've been abused? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So if you have a friend who discloses that they're being abused, the first thing is to listen and to be empathetic to what they're going through. And then to ask them what they want to do about what's going on, because it's not okay. So and then you can talk about, are there strategies and are there people that you could, get them in touch with, like 1-800-RESPECT or whatever, so that they can start getting services. So they might not be quite ready to leave, but they might just be starting to voice that opinion. So you don't want to push a person out of their home if they're not ready to leave. So being a friend for them and checking in on them regularly and finding a way to do that safely so that their partner doesn't know. So coming up with strategies to do that is a really, really good way. So what was the other part of the question? Oh, what should a person do if they're in that situation? So that's also very difficult, because what you want to be doing is assessing, is this something that's exacerbated by a lockdown, or is this something that was already there? But now I can't tolerate it because he or she's around me for longer periods of time. And to that person, I would really be saying that you really need to be safe. And so safe is not just physically safe, it's emotionally safe, it's mentally safe, it's financially safe, it's sexually safe. And so if that's really not happening for you, you have to find a strategy to find support networks to be able to extricate yourself from that relationship. Because generally, if you can't be compassionate while you're struggling through COVID, the odds are this person can't be compassionate at any time. And so they really need help, but you don't have to be collateral damage. And so I would really say it's time to get in touch with services and to connect with definitely families and friends that you probably have been out of contact with because of the perpetrator and because of COVID. So we've got that double whammy. So really start connecting to services and find a way of extricating yourself out. Because I think what COVID is doing is just exacerbating pre-existing problems. And so while people can cope with those problems when we're not in lockdown because you have that respite and you can get out, I think during COVID, when you're in lockdown, it's very much harder to do that. And the person will blame you often for the things that are going on and wrong in the world around you, which you obviously have no control over. And so it is really, really important to make sure that there's safety first, and especially if there are kids involved, because now it's not just that they might do it while the kids are not in the house. Now the kids are always in the house and they can become part of the abuse as well.
Right. Yes. I mean, in a way, what you're saying now, it really goes to everything that we're saying tonight. Everything. This is really like a critical time. It's a time that we're all tested, and in a way we can all learn and grow. We can see what are our strong points, where are our weak points, because we're living in this heightened situation. So in a way, there's an opportunity there for us to, because now we're aware perhaps of some of our frailties. We can work on them, and then after lockdown, well, our relationships will just be incredible.
Well, the trick is to keep up the lessons that you're learning. But absolutely, the people who will do best in this sort of situation are the people who can find pleasure or pleasurable moments in the situation, because I think it's when we go through tough times together that it actually solidifies relationships. When times are good, you generally don't rely on one another terribly much because we don't need each other. But when times are tough, that's, we can see that, God forbid, during wars, people become very nationalistic. We become, very connected to one another, and we become a single people. That's what we want in relationships, is that we have this common goal of surviving this thing together and being stronger for it. And so if that's the aim and you're working to do that, then you start catching yourself when you're doing things you don't like in yourself. And you're seeing the person's reaction to it much, much more frequently. And so you want to not be that person that causes this harm to somebody else.
Right. Yes. Another question has just come in as well, from a young couple, young baby, not much family support, and now in lockdown. And what are some tips as to, and we may have touched on this before, but maybe we can just address it, as to how to keep that spark alive, especially for young couples that maybe don't have that much experience, or as much experience as those who've been married for 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah. So I think once again, we come back to what are we doing as individuals to take care of ourselves? Because if we don't take care of ourselves, we will struggle to take care of each other. So it's allowing each other the opportunity to have time to themselves. So what does that look like in our day? How can we structure our day so that it becomes quite predictable? And I know that in an hour, I'm going to get an opportunity to go for a walk or to have a sleep or to have a rest or whatever it is. So structure is really important, because we're at a time when structure has been kind of thrown out of the window. We would normally leave at a certain time, get to work at a certain time, come home at a certain time. The same for kids, they would start school at a certain time. They would have 2 lessons, a bell would go, and then they would go and let off steam. And then, so while they're kind of trying to recreate that, we want to create a kind of schedule in our relationships that work, that everyone's getting individual time to opt out, and then time to opt in. And then it's looking at what that time to opt in is. So for couples who have a little baby, it would be time to opt in as one parent opting into that child's care, and then time for both parents to opt in for that child's care. So it could be we go for individual walks to look after ourselves, but then we have a joint walk with the baby at some time after lunch, and that maybe puts the baby to sleep. And then what do we do as a couple? Now, obviously, it depends on what sort of work they have to do. That would be part of the schedule. But then it's also recognizing that maybe one of the partners is having the majority of the time with the baby and they need more respite. So it's being compassionate and saying, you've been with, the bub all day. Why don't you go for a walk or have a long bath, or I'll make dinner, or we'll make dinner together and put the baby to bed, and then we'll just have time to ourselves, or we'll watch a movie together. I mean, that's this opportunity, and I've got older kids as well, to Motzei Shabbos, to all sit down and watch a movie. We never did that as a family before COVID. And now it's become such a lovely family time, and soon enough, they'll all be grown up and left home. And so you want to remember these good times. So how can we make those opportunities as a couple to say, well, we can't go to the cinema, but we can find a Netflix movie or something that we can enjoy. And that's what we're going to do when the baby goes to bed tonight, because we had a good night's sleep the night before. And it's getting to bed at a decent time and understanding what sleep you need. It's also about, once again, creating that village. So if I'm needing support around settling and sleeping with the baby, am I getting it? Am I connecting with places like Karatani and getting support around, feeding baby and baby's sleep time? So you want to have that predictability of, I know when the baby's going to sleep, so that we can plan the schedule that works for both of them.
Thanks, Caron. Another question is for some older couples. That's a question from a young couple. What about older couples who've been married 30, 40, 50, 60 years even, who are very good in the friendship aspect, but perhaps may have lost a bit of the spark in the process, or maybe not, but maybe they have. Then what's advice to those empty nesters who now have so much time together? What would you say to them?
Well, you see, especially in lockdown, they don't have to visit their children and grandchildren. So it's about saying, let's enjoy this freedom. What would we do? What do we always long to do? So when I talk to people about retirement, I always say it's not finishing what you're doing. It's retiring to something else. And so what are the things, the interests that we may have, once again, as individuals, that we encourage our partners to do? So we might look at doing courses and things like that, and then being curious about what your partner's been doing. But then it's about joint projects. Maybe together we want to do this room up. And so now we're going to start painting, and then they can have fun around, the paint so it's finding activities or new skills that they may not have invested in previously. And then it's also about, well, what are the things sexually we maybe have never tried? Now that we don't have to worry about somebody barging in, what are the things that we can do? And we don't have to wait till it's nighttime and everyone's gone to bed. We can do it at any time. So they have much greater opportunities. It's getting into the kitchen. I know my husband has now become a bit obsessed with smoking meat on the barbecue. They all find things to do, and I'm incredibly supportive because I like to eat. And so, that suits me beautifully. And so I'll do anything that supports that habit. But then we get an opportunity to have a lovely meal together, and that's a lovely celebration. And, we'll talk about it, and we'll watch YouTube videos about it. And Am I going to start smoking meat? I'm not, but I'm so happy that he's happy to do something like that. So it's about finding those lovely opportunities. But as I say, sexually, you get huge opportunities to do things that you've never done before. And one of those things I would say to couples who do have a bit more time is try some sort of like sensate focus exercise where, often we go from nothing to sex. And what about touch? Have we really experienced what touch is like when we have time to say, what are the ways that my partner likes to be touched? Where do they like to be touched? Where do they definitely not like to be touched? So it's having sorts of games like that, which we've kind of just jumped past. And it's bringing it back to, well, what are the things we really like to do? And what are the things we've never tried but wanted to? And so to have real honest conversations about those things that you've never done because you were just so busy doing. And I think that's part of our problem is we become human doings rather than human beings. And so I think it gives older couples that opportunity to be really mindful and present and say, well, let the games begin.
That's
Right?
beautiful. That's really beautiful. Human beings as opposed to human doings. I love that.
Yeah.
That's really good. And what you're saying also that assumes that obviously each party or each person in that relationship is willing to give that, is willing to sit down and give the other partner the time and to also take their needs into account as well.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you may look at the other person and be like, what do you mean you like that particular, Netflix show? I think it's so silly. So you really do need to, if it means, like you said before, if it means something to you, if it's so important to you to have that smoked barbecue, I may not understand it. It may not mean anything to me, but if it's important to you and I love you, then I will respect you for that. And I will give you that space and I will seek to, allow you to have that joy. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that's where the curiosity comes in. I think we going to create the space to be curious about what our partner finds interesting. We also have to realize COVID won't be around forever. So if my partner finds great things to do, when I go back to work or he goes back to work or the world goes back to normal, he's got stuff to do to keep him busy. And that also means maybe one day when he retires, he'll have stuff to do to keep him busy. And it means, once again, I don't have to be his entire village. And I think that's really important because I think it just puts an enormous amount of pressure on an individual to be everything to somebody else. You just can't be lover, mother, carer, sex slave, whatever. You can't be everything to our partners. We need other people in our lives because we can't have everything in common. And that's okay. It's not an avera. It's not a bad thing to not have everything in common. But you want to be curious about the things that they're passionate about. I mean, if I mention Jordan Peterson to my husband once more, I always think he's going to roll his eyes. And he goes, gosh, let's watch a YouTube video with Jordan Peterson, because that's my new obsession. So it's good to have that because they want to see that light and that spark in your eyes because there's something that you're enjoying and getting pleasure out of. And I don't have to do that for you. You're doing that all by yourself. And so that shows you as an individual, independent human being. And that's what we're trying to teach our children to be curious and find their passions in life.
Yes.
Not to be scared, try new things.
Yes.
Be brave.
And before I get onto that, I want to ask a question about children and finding the love in lockdown, not just with your spouse, but with your children, because often you just want to pull your hair out, pull their hair out. So before we get there, a question has come in about those in isolation who can't leave the house. You mentioned maybe good to have you time. You like going on walks. I like going on my runs. But you're like, it's good to get out, for exercise. What about those who literally can't get out of their house? How do they make space for themselves, have their own time?
So I suppose it depends, once again, if they're in isolation alone or if they're in isolation as a family unit. And so once again, that's finding a space within. So you might define a space in the house or in the apartment or in the hotel room where that's individual time. So you might say, I go and I have a half an hour bath and I read my book while I'm in the bath, and there's no disturbing me while I'm doing that, unless there's an emergency. So you've got to find that time to do these things, but it's also time to really be introspective and reflective. I found even myself personally, like when I'm reading a book now, I think about prisoners and how much a book must be such an escapism for them. So
Mm.
when you see that, what are the things that allow you to escape from where you are in this moment? You are limited by your imagination. And I think the one thing that COVID can teach us all is to expand our imaginations, to take us to places. And we are so lucky, this generation, that we have podcasts and Netflix, and I mean, there are a million sorts of ways of diverting our attention. So it's about, okay, so do a yoga class, download a yoga class on YouTube. It's singing songs and dancing in the living room while you know, certainly with your kids, they love that. They love to see you finding your inner child. I must say, when I cook, I put on a lot of music because otherwise I get resentful because I hate cooking, unless it's for a special occasion. Otherwise, it's just one of the many jobs that I have to do. So what makes whatever you have to do better? And so when you're mindful and you say, gosh, I get to read a whole book from cover to cover. I mean, I never get to read a book from cover to cover normally.
Mm.
Right? So be mindful and enjoy that very simple pleasure, because tomorrow could be over. Right? Tomorrow the kids could be grown up and they'll have left home. So how can you enjoy this moment now and just be present in that moment?
Beautiful. Yes. And now moving on to our children.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that, a lot of the strategies may be similar when it comes to our children, but, when they're having that meltdown or when they're just not listening, you've asked them 5 times to clean up their room because they need their room to be clean for them to be able to have Zoom classes. They can't live in a pigsty, or
Yeah.
just come down for dinner and they're all on top of each other and you're living in a small apartment potentially. What are
Yeah.
some skills there that we can tell ourselves, and even, to help our children when they're becoming frustrated or you're finding the tensions rising amongst your children?
Yeah.
How can you diffuse those? What are some skills there?
So I'll give a plug for Jordan Peterson. So in his book, I think it's chapter 5, he says, don't allow your children to behave in a way that makes you hate them. So I think the one thing is to really have rules and have structure for them, because the one thing about being in lockdown is they've lost a lot of that structure. They've also lost a lot of their support network. And so it's finding strategies to connect them with their friends. So for example, for one family that I saw this week, I suggested that during lunch times, when they have a break from Zooming at school, that actually that's an opportunity for them to have lunch with their friends. So can we Zoom with their friends for 20 minutes and they can connect like they would on the playground? So you've got to understand that you're now becoming their whole world. So you have to find other strategies for them to feel less dislocated, just like you feel. And so it's being empathetic. And once again, they want to be seen for their pain. So often when a child is having a tantrum, it's because they can't access the language that they need to express what they're going through, the anguish that they're feeling about that disconnection, or the sadness of not being able to just run out or go and see people or get into a car just to go for a drive or go to shul like they would normally do. So you want to hear what their pain is, and then you want to reward the good behavior. You want to support them in the bad behavior, which means, can we redirect the bad behavior to do something positive so you can give them positive reinforcement for it? How do I help to make cleaning your room better? So you know what we're going to do? We're going to put music on. We're going to give ourselves 10 minutes and we're going to say, and I do this with myself. Like if there's something I really don't want to do, it might be cleaning out a whole cupboard. I say, we're going to clean out one drawer. Just clean one drawer. And then you do it and it takes you 3 minutes and then you think, well, that was pretty easy. I'll clean out the next. So you could do things like that with them. So you can say, let's check in. We cleaned up half the room. How do you feel now? And they might say, no, this is so much fun. Let's clean up the rest. And you make sure that they're doing 90% of the work. You might be holding the black bag or whatever, or helping them do the things that they struggle with. But you really want to be directing that energy into a more positive way. So just find a way to do that. But you've got to calm yourself down first, because if you're going in there and you aggravate it, that's fuel to the flame. So then just the whole thing decompensates.
I mean, one thing I found is I've noticed myself in the past few days specifically, I'm resorting more towards, treats and bribery. and positive, but also negative as well. Like if you don't do this, then this will be the consequence.
Yeah.
And if you do this, then I'll order you a special treat online. And I picked myself up on that because I was doing it a little bit too much.
Yeah.
And I don't want to teach them that everything, you'll get a treat just for, being on time to a Zoom class.
Yeah.
I want them to learn that they should be on time to the Zoom class because that's what you have to do as a functional human being.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess a personal question from me to you is, where's the line there, and how do you incentivize children without it having to be rewarded every single time?
Yeah. So, well, the one thing is, we all like rewards. We all like something nice, but what you want to do is not reward them every time. So the reward might be a sticker, right? And when they've got 20 of those stickers, then they get something, and it doesn't have to be a big something. And the rewards get taken off when they're not doing their job. So it's about telling children, just like you have jobs, so do they. There are expectations of them, and there's a time for everything. There's a time to learn. There's a time for eating. There's a time for sleeping. Everything has a time. So I'll give you a story. My son was going on the year 10 to Israel, and he said he didn't want to go. And I said, why? He said, because I'm anxious and I'm not going. So I happened to have a late start that day, and I came down in my pajamas, and he said, well, why aren't you ready for work? And I said, well, I've decided then I'm anxious. And, if you don't have to go to Israel, why do I have to go to work? And he said, no, it doesn't work like that. You need to go to work because you need to earn money and you need to go help people. So that doesn't work. So I said, well, what do I do about my anxiety? So I said to him, how about this? You write down all the things you're anxious about and come up with a solution to those things that you're anxious about. And I'll go get dressed and I'll go to work. So it's about actually stepping in their shoes, but it's not okay to just say, this is too hard. Tell me what's hard about it. Once again, it's the solution orientated. So have those conversations, see them for their pain, but also meet them at their level. So obviously for the older kids, you can have a real logical conversation about what about this is so hard for you, and what can we do to make it easier for you? Because it is something you just have to do.
Yes.
And then obviously for the younger ones where logic is not reigning, it's obviously more difficult. But then you might have strategies to sit with them for a little bit to get them going or whatever. And that's the positive reinforcement, is that dad's there for 5 minutes. And then we'll get to make challahs, or we'll get to bake together. And the reward can be something that I have to do anyway, and they would do it with me anyway. But that's now become the reward, is having dad time or having mom time or having dad alone time.
Yes.
They're also not necessarily getting.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to have a cappuccino together or whatever, baby chino together. So you can do things like that actually helps you to connect with them, but it also reinforces the behavior.
So we've discussed love, between and amongst you and your children. We've discussed love for couples early on in their marriage with one or two children, empty nesters. What about those who are dating, and some of the challenges of dating in these times of lockdown? Huge, immense challenges. What have you encountered? What's your advice to those young people who may, be listening to this?
Yeah, I think in some ways it's quite a positive thing, because I think it slows things down. So couples that are already physically involved with one another, gives them a real opportunity to communicate verbally and to create that friendship. And I don't think that's a bad thing. And they can start seeing what I do have in common with this person and start developing some good resolving conflict sort of strategies that they may not have invested in earlier. For other couples, I just think it slows down the whole dating thing, because I think generally dating, especially in the very frum community, which is often the group that I see, they often get rushed. And COVID, when we haven't been in lockdown, has almost rushed them to chuppah, because we could be in lockdown next week, so let's organize a wedding in 2 weeks. And that to me is not a solution. That's a really dangerous game to play. So for me, if it takes a little bit longer and they're learning to communicate, I actually went to a wedding in England yesterday on Freedom Day, or whatever they call it. And this couple, for the majority of their relationship, they've been dating for 18 months. The majority of it, England was in lockdown. But they've got such a wonderful way of communicating with one another, because they've gone for walks together. So it's making opportunities to say, well, let's meet at Centennial Park and we'll go for a walk. But they're talking a lot more. And I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just slows down lots of things. And you say, well, gosh, we've been speaking, it's 15 minutes. I don't know if I want to speak to him again tomorrow because he's irritating me. And I think that's a good thing to see, and that how do we negotiate that? And doesn't mean that I don't like him if I don't have anything else to say to him, or is there just not enough going on in our lives? And so how do they negotiate all this? I think it's fabulous.
Right.
Yeah, I don't see a downside.
But it's like what we teach our couples in our pre-marriage courses about the halakha and the laws when it comes to marriage, that in every single month you have time that you're not together, that you can't be together physically, sexually, and even to touch each other. Nearly half the month you're not supposed to be physical, and the other half you can be. But it's almost like that time that you have non-physical, you fine-tune your skills when it comes to the verbal skills, when it comes to, can you be there emotionally for the other person, where you can't normally just give them a hug and it's all better. You now have to use your words, and especially for those who aren't so good with their words, it's a great training for that. And maybe
and it's absolutely, I agree with you. And it's not just let's have makeup sex in the middle of an argument. You have to resolve the argument, otherwise you don't know if you're going to have a Zoom tomorrow night. And so I think absolutely you're right. I think it is about developing those skills, because I've got lots of couples that really have no idea how to negotiate life outside of the bedroom. And then when problems arise in the bedroom, then they've got absolutely no skill set to get through that. And so to me, this makes this period really very much more intense. Not that we want COVID to last forever, but I think it's giving couples a real opportunity to connect on an emotional level and really see the person for who they are, and what it's like when they get frustrated, and how are they coping when things are stressful and intense. I think it's really a good example for them.
I think this is such an important takeout. If we're going to take one thing out, it's this. It's how we reframe the way we look at this period. We can look at it and say, look at what it's doing to me, and see the negative. Or we can say, it's a great training time. It's time to get to know myself and to know my partner and my children, and what are our triggers and how can we come closer. And so it's an opportunity, as you're saying.
Absolutely. I see it as a great opportunity. I think, the people who will struggle the most are the people who live alone and are lonely, because I think loneliness kills. And to me, that's really where the village comes in, and people need to reach out to those people that they know that are living on their own. Or, when you're not in lockdown, can you go visit the next door neighbor who lives on her own because she's 93? Can you drop over a care package? Certainly I think that's a lovely thing to do, when you just unasked drop something at somebody's front door and SMS them and say there's something waiting for you outside. That just, that mindfulness about those people who are not as lucky, because loneliness is a terrible thing.
Yes.
And that's one thing that's certainly COVID is exacerbating, is that loneliness.
That was going to be my last question, how I wanted to end off with, how can we show love to others? It's all about love, not just in our homes, but in our communities. How do we show love to others? That's a beautiful way. What else can we do to show love to others?
So I think it's giving people time to tell their story, because the one thing that I've certainly found in all my years of being a therapist is that, somebody might walk in and you've already made an assumption about who they are. And it might be good or it might be bad. But what I've noticed every single time is that the more you hear about somebody's story, the more connected and compassionate you become towards them, the more loving you are. And I think COVID gives you the opportunity to hear people's stories who you might not have had time to listen to before. And so listen to people's stories, get to know people better than just passing them in the street. So if you do have a neighbor who's elderly, find out where they came from, find out, what's happened to them. Why are they living on their own? Do they have family? Just get to know them. And the stories that come from people, it's just astronomical. And I've seen this even with, seeing murderers on death row, and they tell you about their childhood. And you say, I could never like somebody who's done something so horrific. But then you hear what's happened to them, and you go, there's an element of, I get this. I get it. I don't justify it, but I can understand why you feel so damaged and broken. So I think having that time to just be and see other people and literally see their pain and their anguish, I think it makes us better people, but it also makes them feel seen as opposed to people we just walk over in the street.
Yes, yes, beautiful. And that's all the questions from me, but I see Roxana. She's a very important person in our community. She's our biggest supporter of our online events. And
Yeah.
Roxana, you have your hand raised. Do you want to ask a question, Roxana? Do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Talking about loneliness, I live by myself.
Yeah.
Do you have a question? What's your question, Roxana?
So I like to have people come and visit me, and it's a bit hard, but they do drop stuff on me, some people. And I'm sure some people are on the Zoom session today and they know who they are.
Yeah. But you see, I think that's a lovely example, because for somebody like Roxana, you could go and make a cup of tea and sit on one side of the fence and the other side of the fence and pick up a pew and sit outside and have a cup of tea together. And so that connecting, I think, and reaching out and putting your hand up and saying, you know, I'm not doing the best that I could, or I'd really like some more support. It's such an important thing. And I think one thing that we all struggle with as human beings is asking for help. And I would hope that during COVID, we learn to ask for help when we need it. Even the young couples with new babies, ask for help where you can. Ask older parents how they, you know, dealt with babies who aren't sleeping or feeding, or go to GPs, go and get your health needs checked. All of these things are really important to follow up with, but it is about connecting in really interesting and curious ways. And I think that's what we want to do as couples, is how do we bring that interest and curiosity into our relationships and do things that we would not normally have the time to do, but show that connection to this other person. And those other people are the, you know, everyone around us, our neighbors, our partners, our children. I don't think it differs. So I think Roxana needs some people arriving with some cups of tea.
Caron, thank you so very much.
It's a pleasure.
I always love talking with you and hearing your advice, pearls of wisdom. And thank you so much for giving up your time. I know you're super busy, not just in your professional life, but with your family life as well. And just thanks for giving us your time tonight. And you can always learn more about love, right? Love is that gift that keeps on giving, isn't it?
Absolutely. And let's get better at it. You know, let's just keep working at it, because there's always room for improvement.
Yeah, and all good things in life, nothing comes easy, nothing comes for free. No. If you want your you know, your love life, your relationship to be super, you've got to really work at it and put in the effort.
And one thing you'll know, the more you give, right, the more you learn to give, the more you invest, and the more invested you become, the better the relationship gets, as long as both people are doing that.
Yeah, beautiful. Caron, I appreciate it so much. Thank you on behalf of everyone here in Maroubra, and for all the guests who are here tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
And we'll see you soon. Stay safe and stay well.
Yeah, you too. And happy Tubav.
Happy Tubav.
Go running through the fields in white. All the best.
Thank you, Caron. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. See you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Roxana.
See ya. Hope to see you again.
Please, God. Keep well. Bye.
Sweet.